Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. First and foremost, I would like to apologize to Sayyid Musa, who's sitting here for 3 nights, even though I'm sitting on the minbar and delivering lectures in his presence. I feel embarrassed, honestly, so I would like to apologize for him sitting here listening to probably repetitions on his behalf. Like, he heard these words before, these ayat and riwayat, and appreciate his kindness of letting me sit here while he's sitting in the audience. I really appreciate that. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Thumma salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين سيما الحجة بقية الله الأعظم روحي وأرواحنا له فداء ولعنه دائم على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So one of the ways to treat mental or spiritual diseases or problems or difficulties when we face individuals that or dealing with these problems or dealing with these issues is that we first and foremost we acknowledge that, look, we understand you're facing these issues and it's natural. The fact that we acknowledge something makes it easier for a person to think about the solutions to tackle that issue as well. So acknowledgement is a very important part of it, to actually treat some of the mental issues that we have, a lot of the spiritual problems that we have. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He uses the exact same method in the Holy Quran as well. For example, when it comes to difficulties in life and hardships, He acknowledges, yes, life is difficult. Hence, He states in the Holy Quran, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Make sure that you seek help from patience and the prayer. And even that, He says that, وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ, and that's difficult in itself. So I acknowledge that you're facing some problems. Imagine a brother, he comes to you, or a sister comes to you, and saying that we have all sorts of problems in life. The first step is to acknowledge it. To say that we understand that it's natural, and that doesn't mean that you're a bad person necessarily. But it's a natural thing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does the exact same thing. وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِئِينَ. And it's difficult except for the individuals that are humble. In other words, He gives us the solution at the same time. So He says, yes, life is difficult, therefore seek patience or seek help from patience and prayer. But at the same time, even that is difficult as well, except if you're humble. So He gives us the solution afterwards. So the first step is to acknowledge something, and He does that in numerous verses. You see in the Holy Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about man and how He created human beings, He always brings up their weaknesses. He always mentions their weaknesses. In other words, I understand that you're facing problems. I understand yet you're limited. I understand that you're weak. I acknowledge that. So think about the solutions. Why? I'm not denying that you're facing these problems. For example, in a holy verse, He states, خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ عَجَلٍ. We created man from haste. Yes, I hasten towards all sorts of things in life, and sometimes I utilize this ability that I have to hasten towards even wrong things in life. Allah says, I know that. I know that. Take my hand, walk a couple of steps with me, and I'll show you the solution then. Or in another verse, He states, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانِ خُلِقَ حَلُوًا. Human beings, man were created impatient. إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرَّ جَزُوعًا. When evil touches them, they become distressed. وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. They're withholding when good touches them. He understands that. He accepts that. In other words, He acknowledges, look, human beings, they're created with limits. They're created in difficulties, distress, and they're impatient. So let's think about the solutions instead. Let's discuss the solutions instead. So the same Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he does the same thing in different narrations. So we should apply the same method when we face different, let's say you see a young person and he shows some sort of a lack of religiosity or lack of taqwa, lack of piety. Well, the first thing you should do is to acknowledge it. Acknowledge, yes, we have some weaknesses, we're limited, therefore sometimes we transgress. It's a natural state of every human being. Hence Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, who stated that the love for this worldly life is the mother of all corruption. حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا رَأْسُ كُلِّ خَطِيئَةٍ. He also states that what? That الناس أبناء الدنيا ولا يلام الرجل على حب أمه. Man or human beings, they're children of this worldly life. And you can't blame a man for loving his mother. That's simple. So the mother of all corruption suddenly becomes a natural thing in the eyes of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. In other words, he acknowledges, look, hubb dunya is a real thing. And I know people get affected by it. It's a natural thing. In another narration from Amir al-Mu'mineen, اِكْرَعْ نَفْسَكَ عَلَى الْفَضَائِلِ. Force your soul into virtues or accepting or obtaining virtues. Why? فَإِنَّ الرَّضَائِلِ أَنْتَ مَدْبُوءٌ عَلَيْهَا. Because spiritual vices, you are naturally inclined towards them. He accepts it. It's not like he's blaming people for, no, he says, just force yourself. He gives you the solution to solve this problem. So when we understand that getting corrupted sometimes can be a natural thing for a human being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Ahlul Bayt, they acknowledge, look, yes, we understand it, it's a natural thing, but that doesn't mean that we are created with a bad fitrah, or that we are initially or essentially we're bad human beings. No. Why? Sometimes it's because of the environment, just like food, for example. If you leave food outside, it becomes corrupted. Does that mean that there's no nutrition in that food anymore, or that it doesn't have any benefits? No. But if you don't take care of it the right way, it will be corrupted. Human beings are no different from this. If we don't take care of ourselves the right way and make sure that we prevent ourselves from transgressing the right way, we will be corrupted as well. And that's a natural thing. We have to acknowledge our own weakness first and foremost. After that, we can discuss the solutions. If you're not going to admit that you're weak or you're limited in so many different ways, of course, obviously, you're going to transgress all the time. Why? إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَنْ أَرَاهُ اسْتَغْنَى. So as soon as he sees himself as self-dependent, he's going to transgress. First and foremost, acknowledge that weakness. So transgression is natural, just like other types of corruption are natural. But at the same time, we understand that when it's natural, that means it's permanent as well. In other words, the battle against transgression or preventing ourselves from transgressing, it's also something which is permanent. We shouldn't expect that, no, because I pray my salatul layl once or twice, then therefore, I don't need to work on my transgression or my self-dependency anymore. That means that now I'm not feeling self-dependent because I stood up for Salatul Layl once or twice, now the problem is solved. No, it's not like that. If it was like that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't make it obligatory for us to pray 5 times a day. In a hadith we have that the prayer, one of the wisdoms behind the prayer is to make sure that you tear out all the arrogance that you have in your heart. You tear it out of your heart. So why 5 times a day? Because after you prayed your Fajr, maybe it would grow again until Dhuhr. After you tear it out, at Dhuhr prayer, after the Dhuhr prayer, maybe it grows out for Maghrib prayer 5 times a day. 5 times a day you have to pray your prayers. Why? To get rid of that arrogance. In other words, it's permanent. Don't expect the battle to stop some point in life. No, it's something which you should be thinking of and battle all the time. Because as soon as you feel independent, just for a moment, you will start transgressing. I gave you the example of Prophet Yunus alayhi salam yesterday. For a single moment, he was left to himself and he ended up in the belly of a whale. According to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's constantly. And as soon as we feel independent, we start transgressing. Just like the child that let go of the hands of their mother because they want to feel a bit independent on the street. Yeah? No, I don't want to hold your hand. Then they run out to the street ignorant of the fact that they're going to get hit by a truck or a car. They're going to hurt themselves. And that's exactly what's going to happen if we feel that we are independent from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we don't acknowledge our own limits, our own weaknesses, and therefore feel that we are independent from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're not dependent on Allah, we like that child then. We let go of the hands of our parents, we run into the streets and get hit by a truck. And then when we get hit, we'll be like, what happened? We don't know where it came from. Understand your own limits and your own weaknesses to understand the solution as well. Acknowledge that there's some weaknesses. I'm going to recite a
beautiful, beautiful narration. And I'm quite surprised that when we teach religion to other people, especially our youth, this should be amongst the first ahadith that we teach them. But unfortunately, it's for the first time I was preparing for this and I was looking in Tawheed al-Saduq and I found this narration. And I was like, this amazing narration, how come I never heard it before? How come I've been in so many classes, so many lectures, participated, been in so many gatherings, I never heard this narration before. I was surprised. Look at the wisdom behind the words of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam when a companion comes to him and he asks him a certain question. Look at the answer as well. So what is it that he asked Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq? He said, لِأَيَّ إِلَّةٍ جَعَلَ اللَّهُ الْأَرْوَاحِ فِي الْأَبْدَانِ. Why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created this soul of ours conditioned by this physical body which is limited and weak in so many ways? How come? And then he explains, بَعْدَ كَوْنِهَا فِي مَلَكُوتِهِ الْأَعْلَى فِي أَرْفَعَ مَحَلٍ. After it was in His highest dominion and in the most loftiest position, He took the soul which is so great and He limited and conditioned it by a body which is so limited, which is so dependent on its surrounding. How does that make sense? What is it that He's telling here? He's acknowledging two things here. That we are limited, our physical body is limited in so many ways, but at the same time, our soul is great. There's a huge greatness behind that soul. Prophet Musa, ala nabiyyina wa alihi wa alayhi salam, please recite the salawat. He once asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where are you residing? Where's your place? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I have no place. I'm infinite, I don't have no place. He said, let's just, for the argument's sake, for a moment, let's just imagine that you had a place. Where would that be? He said, in the heart of every believer. In the heart of every believer. Look at the greatness of this soul, the greatness of this heart that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created for us. In the heart of every believer. In other words, He's acknowledging what? That there's a great soul on one side, and on the other hand, we have a body which is weak and limited. Look at the answer from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. فقال عليه السلام إن الله تبارك وتعالى علم أن الأرواح في شرفها وعلوها متى تركت على حالها نزع أكثرها إلى دعوى الربوبية. If the souls were left in their own state of honor and loftiness, you know what they would do? Most of them would be inclined towards claiming divinity because of they're so great. They will claim divinity because they're so great, these souls. دونه, and they will exclude Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَجَعَلَهَا بِقُدْرَتِهِ فِي الْأَبْدَانِ. So with His power He placed them and made them conditioned by this physical body. So bring them down. You're not independent. And look what He says. التي قدرها في الابتداء الخلق, which He determined in the beginning of the creation. نظرا لها ورحمة, because of His wisdom and His mercy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created this beautiful soul of ours, so great, that if Allah had a place, it would be in the heart of every believer, so we could understand and utilize this greatness to understand the greatness of Allah, not to transgress. Hence He conditioned it by what? Our physical body as well. So make sure, look, you're dependent. Don't let it get to your head that I created you great. And the narration continues. The narration continues as well. So what? Just a quick question. Why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in every prayer He wants us to say Allahu Akbar out of all of the Asma al-Husna that we know of? Why is it that He wants us to refer or give references to His greatness rather than His mercy, for example? Would it be a bad thing to say Allahu Rahman and then start your prayer Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim? No. But He's referring to your greatness. The same applies to the dhikr of the ruku and the sujood as well. Why is that? To understand that you're dependent on Allah. Why? Because emotions needs a strong foundation, and that foundation is that you understand the greatness of Allah, or else you will utilize your greatness, the greatness of your own soul, to claim divinity, just like Fir'aun he did. Ana Rabbuka al-A'la in the Holy Quran, the claim of Fir'aun, right? Or some of these individuals that feel entitled to oppress people today, steal their land, They do exactly the same thing. أَنَا رَبُّكَ الْأَعْلَى. Therefore, they feel entitled to kill them, even children or infants. Why? Because they have this mentality. Hence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He conditioned our soul to this physical body so we understand that. And that's why the concept of the spiritual disease, which is called hasad, is the last thing that will exit your heart even after you enter paradise. Did you know that? We have a narration that states that the last thing that would exit your heart even after you enter paradise. Imagine, not even before that. After you enter paradise, you would take a sip of water, of this heavenly water, yeah? And then afterwards, this jealousy or this envy would exit your heart. Hasad. Envy is nothing but one of the categories of arrogance, takabbur. Why? Because you look at another person and you think that you're better than him, then you start become envious because he was blessed with something that you weren't. So it's nothing but takabbur in reality. So the same thing that we think is on our benefit, our greatness, can also be hurting us as well. In other words, the root for evil and goodness is the one and same thing. There's no difference here. It depends on how you utilize it. Allah, He created you great. But how you utilize this greatness makes a difference. Whether you're going to make it or break it, whether you're going to understand the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not. And the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they understood the greatness of Allah. You know why? Because they utilized their own greatness. They utilized their own greatness the right way, and they belittled themselves in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because at the same time they understood the greatness of Allah. And the fact that they were great was only dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, please recite the salawat. Muhammad wa'ajjil farajah. He saw Fatemiyah al-Zahra, salamun alayhi, jazakumullah khairan. Thank you so much. He saw Fatemiyah al-Zahra after her wedding. She wasn't wearing her wedding dress. So the Prophet asked her, Ya Zahra, how come you're not wearing your wedding dress? She said, a faqir, he came. A faqir, she came and I gave it to her. A faqir, she came and I gave it to her. I gifted out my wedding dress to her. You know what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he answered? We heard the first part, but the second part normally we don't hear too often. The Prophet said, Jibreel has come to me right now, and he has said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling me that tell Fatemiyah, whatever you ask for, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant you that right here, right now. Whatever you ask for, you will be granted that. What would we say? What would our answer be? Normally we could give me a house, give me a car, make sure I get to paradise, all these things. Fatemiyah al-Zahra, salamun alayha, look how she belittled herself. Look, she said, the only thing I wish from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to meet Him, nothing else. The greatness of this woman, she utilized her own greatness. She knew she was great. Or else do you think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send Jibreel to tell His Prophet, to His messenger, that tell Fatemiyah that whatever you ask for, you will be granted it right here, right now? She utilized her greatness the right way. And that is to seek closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the narration continues. And the need of some souls for others, such that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to him messengers. It's not enough that we condition your soul to this physical body. No, human beings, they'll still transgress. Even though that they're limited in so many ways, and they're dependent on so many people and their surroundings and so on and so forth, still it's not enough. So what did we do? We make sure that souls are dependent on each other as well. Even with basic needs, I'm dependent on other people. People in my society, my family members, to take care of others, people who take care of me, so on and so forth. That wasn't enough. And then he says, after that, Allah, He sent His messengers to guide people as well. So that wasn't enough for people to prevent people from transgressing. No, they needed messengers as well. Establishing proofs upon them, delivering glad tidings and warning them at the same time. To understand that if you do good, you will get rewarded for it. But at the same time, if you do bad things or you do wrong things, you will be punished for it as well. They will warn you as well. These messengers commanded them to engage in servitude and humility. And that wasn't enough either. Bow down, put your forehead to the ground. Say Allahu Akbar. Express the greatness or refer to the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 5 times a day, even more than that, all the time. Humility to the Creator in the ways that they were instructed to worship Him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also set forward punishment for them in the present life and the consequences in the hereafter. So He scares us off as well, which we mentioned yesterday, to contemplate upon the verses about the hellfire. He did that as well. Also, we get rid of that feeling of independence and that we think that we are independent, but at the same time that we understand that, look, Allah, He created you great. Like all of these things is because we are so great that if He didn't condition our souls to so many things and limit our souls with so many things, we would claim divinity. We would claim divinity. So it was necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to condition us in so many different ways, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want this arrogant type of love where you think you've done Allah a service by loving Him. What kind of love is that? That you stand up, yes, I worship you. He don't want that. He wants you to belittle yourself so you utilize the greatness of yourself. Because of what? Because this arrogant type of love, shaitan, he had that. That's not what he wants from his servant. That's what he saw with shaitan. He worshipped him for 6,000 years. When he gave him an order that wasn't in line with what he felt himself, he said, no, I'm not going to worship you anymore. This arrogant type of love, he doesn't want that. He wants us to belittle ourselves. And that's why you see the percentage of our du'as, if you recite them, all the different du'as and adiyah that we have, the percentage of them that are referring to the loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a very small percentage compared to the ones that keep referring or giving references to the greatness of Allah. Even Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, such a great individual, the whole universe was testifying how great he was. Yet in Dua Kumail, he said, لا يمكن فرار عن حكومتك. I can't escape. How can I, Ali ibn Abi Talib, with this greatness of mine, escape your heavenly kingdom? How can I do that? I can't. Your divine kingdom, I can't escape it. Me, Ali ibn Abi Talib, with all this greatness that he had. Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Dua Kumail, such a beautiful dua. The first thing that he does, what is it? That he shows gratitude, and then afterwards he talks about his own shortcomings. That's the first thing. First, gratitude. In other words, I'm dependent on you. Second, my shortcomings, my weaknesses, I acknowledge all of it. And in the end of it, you know what he does? He tells Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't put me in the hellfire. Don't place me in the hellfire. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, Sayyid al-Shuhada. You think Allah would place him in the hellfire? No. He was belittling himself because he understood the greatness of Allah. Hence, he utilized his own greatness to seek closer to Allah. This is how you do it. This is the technique to it. Or else it's not going to happen. The narration continues. وَيَزَهَّدَهُمْ فِي الشَّرِّ. And he humbled his servants because of evil. So all the evil that we face in this worldly life is because what? To humble us so we don't transgress. And then it continues. لِيَذِلَّهُمْ بِطَلَبِ الْمَعَاشِ. And he would humble us so we look for our own sustenance. We work for our own sustenance. When you work for your own sustenance, in that action, implicitly you're telling yourself, I'm dependent. I'm not independent. He said he did that solely because that you don't feel independent for afterwards to transgress, to take away the feeling of transgressing from us, to take away the feeling of feeling independent. And you see that all the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were belittling themselves like that. All the awliya of Allah. And then he continues, in Allah ta'ala, أحسن نظرا لعباده منهم لأنفسهم. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He cares more for His servants than they care for themselves. So this narration shows us that the root of evil and the root of all good is one and the same thing. It depends on how you utilize it. It depends on what you do with it. It depends on whether we actually utilize this greatness of ours to understand the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or if we do it to claim divinity like most of us we do. In our daily affairs or worldly affairs, what is it that we do? We consider ourselves to be independent. That is to claim divinity within the action that you're performing. Because the only thing that separates you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that Allah is completely independent. Completely independent. So when you consider yourself to be independent as well, and even in your worldly affairs, you're claiming some sort of a divinity. Hence the first step is to understand that we are dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, Ya ayyuhal insan, innaka kadihun ila rabbika kadhan famulaqi. You are restlessly laboring towards your Lord. In other words, there will be a lot of difficulties and hardships in life towards your Lord, famulaqi. But eventually you're going to meet your Lord. Why? Because the pleasure that will be produced for such a person who utilizes his greatness to seek the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is much greater than anything that you can think of in this worldly life. And that's a hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. He said the muttaqeen, the pious people, the people that understand that they're dependent on Allah, they enjoy this worldly life more than the mutrifeen. Mutrifeen, if I had to translate it, I'm paraphrasing. Imagine a billionaire who spends billions on entertainment in this worldly life. He says, a muttaqi enjoys this worldly life more than that person. According to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. So why is it that we're not enjoying this worldly life the same way like a billionaire that is spending billions of dollars for entertainment? Because we haven't understood that Allah, He created us with a greatness that we should utilize to understand the greatness of Him. We keep on thinking of ourselves as being independent from Allah. So let me give you a shortcut on how to make sure that you will consider yourself to be dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know what that is? Strengthen your emotional bond to the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa Ahlul Bayt alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala. Because if you strengthen your emotional bond to the awliya of Allah, you know what happens? Then you will start to look at their behavior and you will understand that the shortcut to seek closeness to Allah and to feel the need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and feel that you're dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to belittle yourself constantly, just like the awliya did it. In other words, they truly become role models. This is one of the, if not the most important wisdom behind tawassul. The reason for you to get a ticket and get your visa to go to Karbala and Najaf is because of this. So you strengthen your emotional bond to these individuals to that extent that you start looking into their behavior and how they utilize their own greatness to seek the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you do exactly the same thing and you start imitating them. That's the wisdom behind it. That's the shortcut. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam on Yawm al-Ashura, his companions, he was showing them the paradise, the place in paradise. They knew that they were promised paradise, yet the last night they would do nothing but shed tears and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hey, they were promised paradise. They saw it with their own physical eyes. They saw paradise, their place in paradise. Yet they would spend time shedding tears, understanding that they had to utilize this greatness to seek the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they enjoyed it. They belittled themselves. There was another person that belittled himself and herself, both of them, to utilize the greatness they were created with to seek closeness to Allah. And who was that? Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam and Fatemiyah al-Zahra. When Ali ibn Abi Talib, he came to Fatemiyah al-Zahra salamun alayha, and he called her name. He said, Ya bint Rasulillah. She didn't reply. 3 times. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he belittled himself. He said, Ya Fatima, this is Ali calling you. He used his front. We don't even call our teacher, our parent with the first name. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he mentions his first name. Fatemiyah al-Zahra salamun alayha, she opened her eyes, she looked at the face of Ali ibn Abi Talib, she said, my Ali, cry, it's okay. You can cry. Look at them, both of them, they were belittling themselves in front of each other. Utilizing their greatness. They understood how great they were. Fatemiyah al-Zahra, the Prophet told her how great she was. Jibreel told her how great she was. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told her how great she was. Yet, when she asked Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam to bury her at night, she said, Ali, after you buried me, make sure that you don't leave straight away immediately. Sit next to my grave and recite some Quran. Because I love when you recite Quran. I love to hear the recitation of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This great woman that knew she was the whole universe was telling her she was a great individual. Yet she belittled herself because she understood that the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is much greater. And if she wants to seek closeness to Allah and understand herself to be dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she has to utilize the greatness that she has in order to seek closeness to Allah. Ala la'natullah ala qawmi al-zalimin wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.